What if I told you that there are actually only 3 kinds of effects? When you are creating music, you only have to take into account these 3 flavors of effects, and you might want to mix and match them a little bit. And I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what's possible within these 3 effect types. This video is part of me explaining the triangle method. That's a sound design method where we take any style of sequencing, going into any style of sound source, and then we put it into some kind of effect. And that today is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the effects part of the triangle. And remember that once we start to get to something that we like, we bounce our attention between the 3 points of the triangle until we decide to bounce and render things at the end. So when you're designing a musical element, what are the 3 main categories of effects that you need to take into account? Well, the first category are sound design effects. That's essentially anything that shifts the timbre of the sound that you're trying to make, whether that be shifting the frequencies, shifting the stereo image. Basically, you're changing the timbre of the sound, right? That's one big category of effects. And for a more concrete example, imagine that we're talking about saturation or distortion. There's many other effect types that could fit that same category, but basically we're just changing the nature of the sound a bit or a lot. The second category is rhythm. And so that's almost exclusively the domain of the delays. So that is turning our sound into a more rhythmical pattern with a little bit of rhythmical nuance and depth. This can be the magic moment that turns a sound into a groove. And then the third category is a sense of space. This is mostly the domain of the reverb, as you could probably imagine. There's obviously a lot to say at each of these levels, and I want to give you a little bit of an overview and breakdown of what exists within these levels. And you'll notice that what I'm not mentioning is mix down effects, right? Things that are there more for technical purposes like EQs, compressors, effects that invite us more into like a technical perspective. I want us to stay very much in the artistic, creative side of things. So I've made a simple techno loop and let's start exploring. Fairly simple stuff. Let's apply the triangle method. To apply the triangle method, we take any sequencing style and put it into any sound source. Let's make a little MIDI track, and let's make one of the simplest things that I can imagine, a single note on the piano roll. Boom, once per bar. And so as a sound source, today I'm in the mood to hear just a simple acid bleep. I love Fossion for this kind of stuff, and I'm going to use external mode, so no internal step sequencer. You're just going to get something like... Let's even turn off the reverb because I want it super dry. Because today, the whole point is to show you effects, right? Simple sound. So let's talk about category number 1, sound design effects. Probably the most direct way of affecting the sound design is by saturating or distorting. You take any saturation unit or distortion unit and you start finding out what parts of it that you like the sound of. So for example, this decapitator, I know I like it with the drive relatively high. Sometimes I like testing with the punish mode on, and also love moving around the tone to see what that does to the sound. This makes the whole thing more harsh, and in this case, you might be like, that's ugly, but remember that we haven't done any of the other 2 effect flavors yet, no delay or no reverb. Because even quite ugly sounds get quite beautiful if you place them well rhythmically and in terms of space. In fact, it's so ugly, let's quickly put on a simple delay and a really simple reverb. I can picture this sounding good, a bit lower. Oh yeah, hell yeah. So notice I applied the triangle method, I put it into some effects, and then I go back to the level of the sequencing and I moved it down a few octaves, and suddenly we're getting something that's definitely worth exploring. If you only use one effect from this category, let it be a cool saturation plugin. It doesn't necessarily matter which one, it's just the fact that you need to figure out how to get sounds out of it that emotionally hit you the right way. Well, I actually love this. Sick. And a close cousin of these like extreme distortion things are amp sims, amplifier simulation. Let's try a few different ones. Whoa. Pretty dope. I love it. Another way of shifting the timbre of a clean sound to make it more dirty is through ring modulation. Ring modulation is a really complex process that I can't explain very easily, but it does help to see what it does to the frequencies. So this is our sound without the ring modulation. And here it is with ring modulation. And when I move this around, notice how it moves in non-harmonic ways, which means that the harmonics of the sound are all over the place. They don't have simple mathematical relationships to each other. Watch this. This is so crazy. So without the shifter, with the shifter, freaky, yeah? I'm going to keep that on my short list of favorites. Then there's a whole suite of moving effects that's called phasers and flangers and choruses and things like that. These sound great on synthesizers, on vocals. It kind of makes the source material a bit more blurry and instills some movement in it. And then on the more creative side, you also have things like weird filter manglers with step sequencers built in, and you get things like this, which, you know, super cool, worth exploring. Super weird as well. This is obviously doing a lot more than just saturating something. For today's purposes, let's stick with something like this. I would also, between parentheses, want to mention that there are also a whole suite of effects that primarily focus on the pitch of a sound. And those can also be seen as timbre shaping sounds. For example, auto-tune, pitch shifting, four-man shifting, vocoding, or using resonators. There's so much to explore there, it's way too much for this video. I want to instead move on to the big second category. Now, the second category of effects are my favorite. They're the rhythmical delay-based effects. And why are they my favorites? Well, because they can turn any sound into a motif. They can turn any element into a groove. So at the risk of dividing every category into three, there are three types of rhythmical delays that I want to show you. One is a dub delay, one is a tap delay, and one is a grain delay. Those are three different strategies with very different feelings, and they're all super cool. So the type of delay that we've already been using here, the most common one, is what I'm going to call a dub delay. What a dub delay does is takes a sound and it just creates echoes at a rhythmical rhythm going on from there onwards. So just like an echo, basically, right? So do, 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 do. And with delays, one of the decisions we're always going to be making is, do we want things to be clean and synchronized on the grid, or do we want to manually set the timings so that they're going to be not quite perfect? If I turn off the synchronization here, I can set this myself and feel in the context of the techno groove if this looseness is adding something to it. But essentially a dub delay will always just have a feedback, and it will always kind of tail down to silence like this. So I want to propose another type of delay that's very helpful, which is a multi-tap delay. A multi-tap delay is one that you might find in something like an Echo Boy, where you go to the rhythm echo and you see here that there's all these like green bars that indicate how many echoes there are going to be. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set that to very few. Let's say that we want them only 2 echoes. And then it's going to sound like there's a 16th note difference between them. Here, let's move this one down and bring up this one and see what happens. Well, so the beauty of this is that you can then turn any element into a groove within the context of your beat, hitting syncopations, hitting weak beats, whatever you want to do. So let's keep our bow real short in this case. Yeah, cool. And let's do that trick where we do it in clusters of 3/16. So 1, 2 silences, 1, 2 silences, and there. And so we can also set the relative volume, so that's fun. Cool. Now, of course, rhythms are best evaluated in the context of a mix, so quite cool. Yeah, I think I prefer it like this. And like in the triangle method, let's move back to the other levels. Cool. So now we've created something that goes ba-da-dow rather than bow, right? It goes ba-da-dow. And that's by simply adding a multi-tap delay. And then the third type of delay is granular delay. And this is honestly one of the things that has been, like, of the last 5 years, one of the most satisfying musical discoveries. Granular delays like Portal. You take a very simple motif like this bow, and it chops it up into little sound slices and rearranges it according to some chaotic algorithm depending on the preset that you do. So for example, let's take ambient lake. Freaky. So every time I hit a note, that's freaky, right? Is it too freaky? Let's listen in context. It's very freaky, but I am enjoying it and we could make it work. Let me show you some more examples. For example, trans particles. It's definitely related to a dub delay, but it's shuffling things around in a slightly non-stable way. That's freaky. Like, that's a bit too much for a bit too rich for my blood, as they say. Imagine I want to go with something like this, which is not at all where I thought we'd end up with this. I really want to get to a point where I can resample this as a layer to layer it in my track, because I definitely think this has a lot of potential. So let's move on to the third type of effects, which are the effects especially for a sense of space. So reverb-based mostly. The most classic one of which we are already using, which is those that are really trying to simulate an acoustic space, like a room reverb or a hall reverb. Sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes you want something a bit more abstract. So for example, let's open up the Valhalla plate. This is not meant to be a realistic room sound. This is meant to be almost like a tail generator, like an abstract tail generator. It's quite a nice sound. This pushes the sound quite far back in the mix, and so we have to be careful with that. Adding too much reverb can make a sound pushed back and sound blurry, and that can be fine if that's what you want to do. But just realize that, of course, if a sound has to be up close, it'll probably have a little bit less reverb on it. In fact, if you want to go even more abstract, there's another type of reverb which is called convolution reverb, which you can use to make these realistic type delays, but you can also use it to just add a weird sense of body to your sound. Let me show you. So in Ableton, there's this convolution reverb, right? If you set the blend of the hybrid reverb to 0, then it's only these convolutions, right? And so you can go for weird textures. Wow. Let's go for a different one. We set it to 100% wet. And this is an element that could live in this track for me. So let's complete the triangle workflow and let's resample this. As simple as adding in an audio track, setting the input and hitting record. Let's go. What would I want to change about this sound? Maybe the reverb tail is very long, you know? Done. Done. Honestly, done. This simple sound is a cool sound. It's got a sense of expressiveness. It has some depth and nuance. And I don't know, I think it's a pretty enough sound. This obviously isn't a lead sound for the track, but it can exist. Just to show that all of this work hasn't been for nothing, let me search for some other sweet spots using the same elements. So on this one, for example, I like how it expresses itself here, and I don't like how it expresses itself here and here. So by bouncing it to audio, I can just simply take the parts that I like. There we go. Now that convolution reverb is going to get pretty tiresome if I put it on everything, so let's take that away. And now that we've got so many timbres with a lot of decapitator on them, let's take that away, or at least soften it way, way, way down. This was the sound Once we've deactivated all of these effects, this was the sound that we had. Let's maybe change some things at the source. Let's change some things at the level of the sequencing. Because this element is taking up so much space in the mix, let's maybe create this new element as a call and response to it. So it would be something like... That's a riff. I don't like the sound yet, but that's what the effects part of this is about. So yeah, this is the element that I came up with then. And for me, this has depth and nuance and subtlety. It's a simple acid line that goes through, that's going through a little bit of saturation, a portal, and a Valhalla, but not even very dry wet, just enough to give it a sense of space. And this is going to be real geeky, but there was a moment when this kind of blew my mind, this kind of subtle, creating a subtle sense of space and a subtle sense of complexity behind elements. So much so that I got it tattooed. For me, this tattoo is about that. It's a triangle, right? And the tip of the triangle is the element. And then sort of the projection coming out of the triangle below is the sense of space or a sense of dimension behind it. A lot of words just to say, put a little bit of delay and a little bit of reverb on this stuff. But for me, it meant a lot. Anyway, I hope you see again that the triangle method is a very playful and experimental way of generating musical material that has such depth, nuance, and aliveness. And that it invites me to stay within my senses, not too much within my brain. It's like, oh, I wonder what it feels like if I push this there. That feels like that. Okay, what if I push this there? That feels like that. And then you tweak in that triangle again and again and again, and then you bounce it to audio and you commit to it. And you make yourself a lot of material like this, and then you can just mute and unmute. And then later on also, you could probably also going to do some mix down stuff, but that's not what this is about. We're staying in our creative flow, we're staying in our artistic mindset, creating elements that we like. And so if you've watched this far, now you've probably understood the triangle method in its completeness, and you see the potential of it. I've been creating a printable poster so you can have this workflow up on your wall to remind you of it. That should be downloadable in the description. Part of me is considering turning this method into a full course where we go deeper on individual tools, because this was a very shallow overview of all the things that's possible. Because I do think that this perspective offers a very valuable and fertile way of building on the foundations principles that you will have seen maybe in the other courses that I've done. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of that idea. It could be a course where we just explore a whole bunch of different tools at the level of the sequencer and at the level of the sound source and at the level of the effects, exploring each of these methods in a little bit more detail because, again, I didn't want to bore you in these videos. These are very overview-based videos. If you do like the way I teach, go check out courses.underdog.brussels. Subscribe to the channel, say something nice in the comments, and until next time, stay producing, be good to each other, and take care. Bye-bye.